keeping in mind that in a small country like Bhutan, it is bureaucracy's example that will be followed. Strengthening the civil service would be the first step to creating a strong foundation for a successful democracy. The civil service must strive for the highest standards, live by higher ideals, and nurture a sense of duty towards fellow Bhutanese. Therefore, the Royal Civil Service Commission should focus on bringing about required reforms of the civil service in time for it to facilitate and support the emergence of democracy, meet the challenges of building dynamic economy, and to fulfill its role in achieving the goals of gross national happiness. His Majesty the King. Kusuvang Bola, welcome to your UN House. As His Majesty the King has rightly said, our greatest wealth in human resources is characterized by civil servants who strive in various capacities in different villages, Geo, Zongkuks, and here in Tippo. There are more than 29,000 civil servants working in 10 ministries and agencies. There are around 13,000 personnel in the armed forces, more than 7,500 working in companies such as Druk Holding Investments, and another 3,300 work for other state-owned enterprises. The country also has around 1,500 elected representatives. In total, there are around 54,500 public servants, which means that there is one public servant for every 13 Bhutanese citizens. Our civil services, by quality of its knowledges, experience and understanding of public affairs, have great responsibility to implement policies for the welfare of the society and the enhancement of the nation. Let me now speak about Aum Karma Hamu Dorjee. Aum Karma is the chairperson of the Royal Civil Service Commission. She is the first woman to head the RCSC. Aum Karma has over 26 years of experience in the public sector. Before becoming the chairperson of RCSC, she was the assigned commissioner for human resources within the RCSC. Aum has a master's in local and regional government from the Institute of Social Studies, The Hague, and she has served within the United Nations in a previous incarnation. This life, of course. Dr. Karma Phuntsho is the founder of the Loden Foundation that has a specific focus on entrepreneurship, education and culture. Let me draw out one fact. During his leadership of the Loden Foundation, Loden has supported 3,400 aspiring entrepreneurs. Truly cutting-edge work by a CSO. And coming to the close, after the tea, I would like to invite you to come back for the add-on session on Bhutan Dialogues. Today we have Kinley T. Dorjee, a young architect running an architectural studio called Yalnik Architects. Kinley also writes about Bhutanese architecture on his Instagram page. He graduated from Assumption in Thailand, the School of Architecture, and he will today speak on the topic storytelling on Bhutanese architecture. As our initiative to support young entrepreneurs today, we will be serving kabze from Bhutan Kabze production under our usual tea and coffee session. All of you are most welcome to join us, and with that let me hand over to Dr. Karma and Aum.
Welcome to the 21st session of Bhutan Dialogues. We have started this forum about 2 years ago with the hope of creating a space for critical thinking through civil conversations, to ask tough questions about current issues, but with humility. A kind of a space where we can bring public figures and leaders like yourself and help us push the boundaries of our thought and inform and inspire the young audience. So thank you for joining us. And as ritual, I always ask our guest to tell a little bit about himself or herself for our audience to really know you. If you can give us a brief account of your journey to where you are right now, what made you who you are, any interesting anecdotes or experiences, anything that triggered you to set you on this path.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Karma. Thank you, Gerald. Thank you to the UN for giving this space and for making the UN House our UN House. And to all our audience here today, very good afternoon. And on behalf of RCC, we are very happy that we see many young people wanting to know about this organization known as the Royal Civil Service Commission and the civil service at large. And the topic that I chose for the discussion today is known as the performance of the civil service, because that is something a lot that we hear a lot about in the media and in many of the deliberations and discussions. So to answer, Doctor, to begin with, I would say, of course, my earliest influences have been my parents. Although they didn't have an education, they made the effort to put me into a good school and to give me a very strong, which gave me a very strong foundation in education. My parents were very hardworking people. I remember never seeing them sit still. So from them I learnt the value of hard work. Really, they had very, very strong work ethic, and they always told us, their children, that if you want something in life, you have to work hard. So this is something I learnt, something very strong that I always remember my parents, is the very ferocious work ethic. Then
were they farmers?
My father was a trader. So when Thimphu was starting as a small town, he came from his village and he set up a small shop, and my mother used to help him. And then I think the second influence is the school that I went to. It was a boarding school in India, a Catholic boarding school, and there, of course, strong educational foundation. They made us study. The atmosphere was very competitive. You had to do well, and also moral values. The nuns mainly drummed it into all of us. The moral values of being honest and being kind and being responsible. So a lot of these moral values really stayed with me and continued to stay with me. And then following my completion of my education, where I studied in Sharapse for the pre-university, and then I went on to do my degree in Delhi University in history. Yes. I went to do the history honors from the Indraprastha College for Women. After completing my studies, we were quite, we really were quite clueless as far as going forward what we wanted to do. So all of us sat for the civil service exams, my friends included, and then we got through the civil service exams, and I joined the Ministry of Home Affairs. And I worked for about 14 years in the Ministry of Home Affairs in various capacities. And then during my stint in Home Affairs, I got the opportunity to work on a secondment in the UN. So I worked in the UN for about 1.5 years on a secondment, and I worked as the governance unit head. And at that point of time, the office wasn't here, it was down in the old building. And then I came back from the UN, and the opportunities of the civil service is that the beauty of the civil service is that you can work in so many organizations, in so many sectors, and in so many different positions. So it gives you a very varied experience. And then from there, I went on to work in the GNH Commission, and then very briefly in the Ministry of Health before I was appointed as Commissioner in the Royal Civil Service Commission. So today I continue to serve in the Royal Civil Service Commission, and that 26 plus years of my experience as a civil servant plus as a public servant has, I learned from so many supervisors, from so many different bosses, both good and bad, and you learn from their successes. You also learn from their mistakes that they make, and while of course sometimes not so you have not so great bosses, but in retrospect you also learn that things that you shouldn't be doing as a manager if you want to motivate your staff. So you learn from the good and the bad, but at that point of time you're a bit you don't see that. It's perhaps in retrospect you see this. So and then I think a lot of my what I am today, I would also like to give credit to my family. They have been a great support system for me, and if you move around only in civil service circles, you're sort of you have sometimes this feeling that what you're doing is right. So you need sometimes other sounding boards that tell you that perhaps the perspective is different from outside. So in that sense, my family has been that sounding board. They have been the greatest support, but also sometimes very tough critics. Yes. So they ground you in that sense. And you think you are okay, I'm doing very well, and then they bring you down to earth. So I think that's all in all, I think these are the various experiences and influences that brought me to where I am today.
But when you look at your career, you've been mostly a bureaucrat, a civil servant, and then you became member of the commission, leading and supervising the largest and the most powerful organization in the country. And now you're the boss, the chief chairperson. Are you the first female chairperson in the Royal Civil Service Commission? Yeah, well, congratulations for that. But do you feel the sense of achievement? As a civil servant, even today, young graduates, or almost all of the best ones, aspire to be a civil servant. You have reached the peak. You are the sort of the ultimate position holder in the system. So you get that sense of achievement.
Yes, with all modesty. With all modesty, I think yes, I am very grateful for this opportunity that has been bestowed on me by the government and His Majesty the King. But I also look at it as a great responsibility. So yes.
Yes. So continuing on the responsibility part, now the civil service, in the eyes of many people, is seen as this very huge, big, sometimes even stagnant system. And then there are all these OD exercises being done to make it better. What's the situation right now? A lot of people have this perception that the civil service is this cushy, secure job that you want to get for a lifetime. And even if you don't deliver as much as you, or as much as the public demands, you're okay unless you do something terribly bad. So what's your viewpoint of seeing from the top and also from within?
Yes, I think the civil service is the biggest employer in the country, 28,600 plus people, and with it comes a lot of challenges, trying to keep it small and compact, keeping it efficient. So if you look at an organization, you cannot. When we scan an organization, that you talked about the OD exercise. When you scan an organization, you have to look at it from what they call the 7S perspective.
Yes.
So all these 7S has to work in perfect harmony for an agency to perform. So if I may just very quickly tell you what the 7S is. One is the structure. The organization must be structured efficiently and effectively so it can perform. There must be the number of staff and the skills that the staff and the skills, the numbers, the levels, the kind of professions you want, the kind of occupational groups you want have to be aligned to the needs of the organization. Then what kind of strategies do you want for that organization? What systems are there in the organization that help you make the decisions? Whether it's the performance or the performance management systems or the protocols that you have in an organization. So these are what we call the 5S, which is the more tangible and harder parts. But then the most softer aspects of an organization is what we call the shared values. What are the values that underpin that organization? The leadership, what do they believe in? How do they see the organization? Where do they want to lead it? And then the kind of style that the managers at all levels have. So if an organization has to work perfectly, you need all these 7S to work in harmony. So that is a very complex, I mean, governance is very complex. It's not so straightforward. So trying to build these systems require, in the period of the second commission, which started in 2014, a lot of initiatives and reforms have been put in place. So going forward, we want to invest in more and more of strengthening those systems and also introducing, wherever required, new approaches, new areas of development, so that we can make the civil service compact, efficient and effective. But compact is always something that is not completely in the hands of the Civil Service Commission, because a lot of growth in the civil service is caused by policy changes, like if the government of the day wants to establish early learning and childhood care centers, the ECCDs, it means there is going to be a lot of, because it's HR intensive, there's going to be a lot more staff that's required. Or the government wanting to establish the central schools. Then with the central schools, a lot of HR requirement, or a new hospital, new policies, then sometimes acts. So we can rationalize it to that extent, ensure that there is utilization of staff and so on and so forth, have protocols to ensure that right person, right job, all the technical aspects. But the decisions are usually sometimes not completely in our hands. So if you look at the period between 2013 to 2018, there's a growth of almost 3,500 civil servants. And largely this is because of policy decisions. You give a bolero to the Geog, you would need a driver. So these are all the ways that the civil service grows.
I was thinking of coming to this later on. The challenge the civil service faces sometimes in having changing political masters. In the past, you had a fairly consistent government, so the policies and the implementation could also be fairly consistent, I suppose. But now, every 5 years, you have a new government come in sometimes. I mean, it's not going to be necessarily the case that there will be new government. So far we had, and then their priorities change, as you said. So has that been a struggle for the civil service? How do the civil servants cope with different political masters and their changing priorities?
Yes. So the government of the day has the legal mandate to implement the policies, implement development plans and programs, and prioritize and say where is it they want to put in their efforts. So our role as civil servants is to support the political masters within, as long as it is within the legal frameworks and within the rules and regulations. So
suppose the next government decides not to have the boleros in the gearbox, what will happen to the drivers?
Yes.
Will that be a challenge for you, basically?
Yes. So as an example, the drivers, most of these new positions we have tried to put in under contract, so that if these positions do not last out for a couple of plan period, then we can easily let them go after the contract period is over. So contract gives us that flexibility in managing human resources according to the needs of the time.
So with regard to structure and the 7 S's you mentioned, if I were to ask you from 1 to 10, where would Bhutan be right now in aligning the 7 S's that you mentioned? Are we faring above the average, or are we somewhere in the middle compared to countries similar to us?
Yes. If you were to compare LDC countries, I would definitely say we are doing very well.
Better.
Yes. In terms of civil service ratio, we are about 1:26. Not really good, but not so bad in terms of the size of the civil service. Skills, as His Majesty himself has said, that the civil service is very very knowledgeable, has travelled well to every corner of the country, and that we have been equipped with the knowledge and the skills. So I think I would like to believe that our civil service is perhaps one of the most modern, at least in the region.
I mean, having the structures and the policies perhaps is the easier part of the job for you, but having the right culture, the right mindset, that is much more challenging. I remember a former president of India saying that bureaucracy is the biggest hurdle to development. And I think along similar lines, His Majesty in the last National Day address also said that we risk our public servants can become an impediment to national development progress, and the greatest danger will come from their complacency and indifference. What do you do to deal with such personal, internal challenges, mindset, culture?
Yes. So thank you, Doctor, for that question. This is also the question that is very much on our minds in the Civil Service Commission, and we feel that in our discussions we've had very deep discussions with agencies across the country. We've also had discussions with all the ministries, and there we've actually played His Majesty's speech and asked people to reflect, all the civil servants to reflect and say, now what can we do? How can we do things better, faster, cheaper going forward? And in the civil service, we believe that changing what we call the 2S, the shared values and the style, which is about culture. This is going to be the very, perhaps the most challenging part of our job. And we've built in performance management systems. We've done the necessary, trainings on how to actually execute the various processes on these performance management systems. We've set up the rules and regulations. All the hard parts of our system are more or less in place. The rules and regulations are there to uphold, uniformity in the way we manage the HR actions and all of that. So we also came to that realization that we need to put much more emphasis on building a stronger culture of engagement in the civil service, and that hinges on leadership. So a large part of our thrust of the third commission will be on leadership management and leadership development. So we've already started a lot of work there in the sense of, we have the various training programs in the Royal Institute of Governance and Strategic Studies. We've also had ex-country trainings on both domain and the other aspects of leadership. We've sent out executives. Now going forward, we are actually investing a lot in supervisors, not necessarily people at executive only, but even people at the P1, the managers at division level, and then onward to executives to really help them get the necessary skills to mentor, coach, and help their staff. Because to be fair to our supervisors, they never got those trainings. We hadn't given such trainings in the past, and people who were good managers or who were good leaders were because they had that natural ability, and we didn't systematically invest in leadership in the civil service. So going forward, for us, a large part of our efforts going forward will be really building leadership skills, actually emotional competencies, so that leaders are able to engage with their staff. They are able to build a good trusting relationship, because in the end, if you are able to tap the intrinsic motivation in your staff, if your staff trusts you and they are able to work on independently, we would see that we will really unleash all this knowledge and skills and abilities that we have in our civil servants. So culture, building a good engagement culture in the civil service is something we really want to do. And this is also the effort that Doctor, you had asked me earlier about Search Inside Yourself. Yes. It's all about trying to build leaders who are mindful, who have strong abilities of empathy, compassion, kindness. Because in the end, if the supervisor is somebody you trust and you believe in, then you can imagine that we'd have great productivity.
I did want to ask about that. Going back to the ODA exercises you had, during the first government's time, there was McKinsey who came in. Not many people appreciated their intervention or the recommendations they gave. I don't know how much change that has brought to the civil service. And then we have RIGS. To ask if RIGS has made a big difference to the civil service and how they work. And then you have now Google's Search Into Yourself. What is it called? Search Into Yourself Leadership Institute.
Yes.
So are these really making a difference? Or should we wait for a few more years or decades or generations for the results to become palpable?
Yes. So to start with, Doctor, my view of the McKinsey project is a little different.
Nice.
Because I was working in JNC at the time. And they actually, working with McKinsey, today we are able to have the government performance management system, and we are able to have the managing for excellence, which is the individual performance management system, is largely to the technical expertise that we got through the McKinsey project.
Nice.
Of course, there was a lot of criticism about it, that they were paid a lot and so on and so forth, but we can see some remnants of this, the positive remnants of the engagement with us in the 10th five-year plan.
Yes, thank you. That's good to know.
Yes. So in terms of the Royal Institute of Governance and Strategic Studies, if you look prior to the establishment of RIGS, we didn't have any agency that was specifically and focused on leadership training.
Nice.
So, as I said before, if you were a good leader, it was your natural ability.
Nice.
And if you look at actually, a lot of the leadership capabilities are emotional capabilities, competencies, and they are actually trainable. It's not something that you can say, I don't have it, I am a technical person, I cannot build leadership. You can actually build leadership capabilities, and RIGS is doing a fantastic job with that. And they are trying to target leadership at various levels. Because you cannot have one leadership training and say that now I've got all the training. You need to build it consistently from the time people enter their service at say P5, P4, and then as they go up the ranks at mid-level, at senior level, and even at executive level. You have to constantly be able to invest in the civil servant so that they can they're up to speed with the latest thinking, with the development tools that we might have. So this is an effort from our side in RCC. We want to continue this engagement and actually really deepen it, so that by the time and now with our new systems of the performance management, we can actually very easily spot potential. In the past, if you wanted to say who are the good officers at P5, it will be very difficult to spot potential. But today, because of the need for differentiation in the new performance management system, we can at least generate a list of all civil servants we feel that have potential. So these are the ways that the systems can help us, and we can then actually invest in them consistently over the years. And Search Inside Yourself is actually just a tool that we have. It's the neuroscience-based mindfulness. So it's a very practical tools on, and Doctor, you would be probably the better master at this, but but it's about trying to be mindful. So, but without any attachment of any kind of a spiritual discourse on it. It's just about trying to be mindful and calming your mind down so that you have a calm but clear mind. And the second aspect of searching inside yourself is because you have focused attention, then you are able to see your stream of thoughts and your emotive process, and therefore from a third person perspective, you can see all of that, and that will probably lead you to be greater self-regulation, knowledge, and hopefully self-mastery. So if we can actually implement it in its full form, then perhaps we will be more resilient, more compassionate, more mindful, and also happy. So that's the intent.
That's the purpose.
Yes.
But I don't know much about it. I've read about it on the internet a bit. When you look at such practices or programs done here in Bhutan, I remember universal human values at one point became quite popular, especially in the Royal University of Bhutan
Right.
colleges. And then there were critics from within the country saying that deep in its philosophy, it's not aligned to the Bhutanese system. And I think somehow it slowly got well, neglected or dropped. My question to you, I don't know about SIYL. SILI they call it as an acronym. So I don't know much about SILI program, but is it culturally contextualized and adapted to the Bhutanese system? Because when you deal with emotional intelligence and cultural sensitivities, I think these programs have to address the psychological conditions of the people. And if they are not culturally contextualized or adapted, they may not have their best impact. So the SILI program we have here, is it made culturally applicable, culturally useful for the Bhutanese context, or is it just something that was brought in from Google wholesale?
Lasla, we've started this Search Inside Your program very recently. So
it was in education before it came to a civil service.
Yes, yes, and in terms of the cultural orientation and whether it would sit well in Bhutan, I think this point of time is a little bit early, but our engagement and our practice that we see with Search Inside Yourself is a lot to do with, if you look at the examples that they use, a lot has to do with actually Buddhist practices.
Yes.
So I think there would be a good orientation in that sense. They teach you mental habits, which is practice of, because actually it's a very simple practice in that sense. It's just calming your mind down, and through the calmness see yourself clearly, and therefore know yourself clearly. And then practices of like you do mental habits like, okay, today I practice kindness, today I'm going to practice compassion. So in a sense, I feel that there's probably not much differences.
Problem.
Yes.
I mean, on the whole,
Yes.
I think even the audience we have in the civil service for this program, they are very well educated, totally exposed to the Western culture. So I suppose it will work much better with civil service than with, say, the farmers in the villages.
Yes.
But coming back to now, the general question of, say, civil service, of course, at the moment, the civil service remains as the main driver of the economy. It's the largest, most powerful organization. But as we go forward, as we aspire to have a more stable, sustainable economy, as we also plan to have a more decentralized, democratic society, should some of the privileges given to the civil service right now, like these capacity building opportunities, like the SILI program or RIGS program, should these, and also the incentives like the vehicle quota, the pay rise, and all these benefits that come to the civil service right now, that only makes the civil service even more important, stronger and bigger and more rooted, and doesn't allow the general society to grow as much. And the civil service as a whole is less than 5% of the population. So should this focus right now on civil service should be diverted a little bit to other sectors as well, going forward, thinking of the macroeconomic, bigger national sort of future.
Yes.
As a head of civil service, I understand if you have to argue for the civil service, but suppose you leave the hat of the chairperson right now and think of the country generally.
Yes. Yes, the civil service continues to attract the best and the brightest, and that's a good thing for us.
Yes.
Because we get good officers into the civil service. But we are also mindful that the economy at large requires good people. Yes. But the work of the civil service is one which should act as the facilitator, providing the ecosystem for the economy to flourish. If our CSI, small and cottage industry programs are able to develop and promote CSI, or we are able to resolve and provide better livelihoods to our farmers through corporate development or better marketing facilities, or the unemployment schemes are able to provide gainful employment for our youth, then the civil service is the lever for all of this, the catalyst for all of this. So in a sense, while I agree that the civil service is not the only sector in an economy at large, but for a small economy, a landlocked country, vulnerable, economically very vulnerable, it is important that that the civil service plans and programs and various organizations in the civil service should serve ultimately, if we are able to have the right programs that allow for the economy to flourish, it would be for the benefit of all our citizens in the country. On the perks and privileges, of course, this is something that if you want people with certain caliber, certain competencies, you also have to compensate them reasonably well. Otherwise, then you might have not good people in the civil service, which will not serve the country well as well. But we have to take the responsibility commensurate to the perks and privileges, and much more, and actually deliver what the plans and the programs of the government is. We need to deliver on our enduring goals of self-reliance, sovereignty, and security. So all those aspects has to be something that civil service must deliver.
But at the moment, these perks and incentives, recognitions outside of civil service is almost nil, isn't it? So maybe this should widen up a bit. Now coming again back to this issue of downsizing, making the civil service compact and efficient. About 50% of the domestic revenue goes to fund the civil service. Seems, am I correct?
About 35%.
35%. And then the entire revenue from Mangdichu is going to go and pay for the pay hikes. So it's quite a big financial burden as well for the state, anyway. In terms of how you sort of downsize, I was wondering whether in the civil service you need people who would implement the programs. I mean, you pointed out the civil service really needs to regulate and facilitate. But currently, aren't there many programs which are implemented by the government rather than being outsourced to the private or to the CSOs or to the communities? Could those be sort of cut down? Do you see any space for that?
I see that there are a lot of possibilities. Outsourcing, many of the services can be outsourced to the private sector. If civil society organizations step up and want to do certain aspects, and it's possible, we should try all these various mechanisms, as long as they are within the purview of the regulatory and the legal framework. So wherever there's an opportunity, I think that's. But RCC per se is not the organization deciding these things. Yeah. So the organizations would be the government, of course, the cabinet and the various agencies that implement. But if the civil society organizations and private sector can do it faster, better, cheaper, we should explore it.
Now going forward, say in 10 years or 15 years or even 5 years time, if you want to see any major changes in the structure of the civil service that exists right now, what would those be? Say 3 or 5 things that you would want it differently.
Yes. So maybe 15 years down the line, His Majesty in one of his speeches said that excellence should be the only standard we should uphold is excellence. So hopefully 15 years down the line, all civil servants embody and exemplify excellence in service. And that should, in terms of tangible outcomes, we should see that service delivery by civil service agencies should be citizen-centric and should be of very high standards. Secondly, we should see much greater productivity in the civil service. That means much smaller civil service, better paid, much smaller, but doing much more. And third is the civil service should continue to be the place that attracts the best and the brightest, because people want to join the civil service. I'm talking 15 years down the line. They want to join the civil service because they find it a place of where they can do meaningful work, they can contribute to nation building, but they can also have very good work-life balance. So this is what we aspire. But immediately, in the immediate term, because we are a commission that has a 5-year tenure, so immediately a lot of things we want to do is, one is the focus on leadership, how we recruit them, how we manage them, how we ensure accountability, how we develop them. So leadership as a big theme. Then the others is the right sizing, which we are doing through our OD and staffing exercises. So really about looking at an agency through using the 7S as the framework and trying to see how best to organize that organization and all the aspects of that organization so that it's very lean and really efficient. This full utilization of staff. The OD is about right sizing. Then the third one is about service delivery, because we know that there has been many debates in the media, both mainstream and social, about service delivery. So we want to work very closely with the Public Service Delivery Division of the Cabinet Secretariat, which was previously known as G2C, and also the Department of Local Government. So we want to work closely with them and actually pick up a few agencies to really do an end-to-end scan. Because in the past we took service delivery, we mapped it, we put it on an IT platform. But we didn't actually look at the accountability systems, the decision-making systems around these various services. And then while people are put as a team, because they worked in that organization say for 10, 15 years, they were never trained as a team. They were never given client orientation. So these are the new aspects we want to bring into service delivery. But to start off, we would like to work with a few agencies and few critical services. And also some of the ideas we're thinking about is actually let's try for ISO 9001 if it's possible.
What is that?
It's a service delivery standard, management standards. So if we can do that, I mean, then we are able to shift gears to world class, world standards. So these are some of the things under service delivery. And then the other one that we want to do is civil service well-being. Because if you want civil service to be happy people who serve their clients with open heart and with the same orientation to their clients as they would to their friends and family.
So more attractive packages?
No, not at all. We don't have, RCC has no say on remuneration and salary.
So what would be your way of keeping the well-being?
So one is we have started what is known as the Civil Service Welfare Fund, which it's a scheme of, by and for the civil service, where we contribute on a monthly basis, and then we make payouts when there's death, and we want to up the scheme to perhaps disability, to housing in the future. So these are the schemes that we are looking to allow civil servants to have. At least they know that there's some well-being schemes that have their back. So those are the others, and then we would like to also look at leadership one, right sizing two, civil service well-being, and I forget the
well-being was the fourth. I can't remember the third.
Maybe my colleagues in the audience will remember it for me.
But for instance, if I reflect on the first Chancellor, you're going to take up immediately. Leadership. It's wonderful in a way that we develop leaders, because productivity in the end is probably up to these leaders. But then that's going to further reinforce the hierarchical structure we have. So is it the plan of the Civil Service Commission to keep the hierarchical structure instead of having a more flat, more democratic, decentralized system?
Yes. The way the Bhutan Civil Service rules and regulations have been structured is that all HR decisions are managed, whether it's your promotion, your transfer, your training, all HR decisions are managed by the Human Resource Committee. So in a sense, it's because when you are a member of the Human Resource Committee, you have an equal vote in decision making related to your organization. So the way the most civil service organizations are structured is you would have the head of the agency. If you were talking about a small agency like say RCC or JNHC, you would have a secretary, you would have a director, and then you would have the division heads. And then the next level are all the staff. So it's not as hierarchical as it seems. It's just maybe at the most 2 or 3 levels. And decision making is largely done through the Human Resource Committee. So Dr. May I just come back to my 5th point, which is civil service systems. So it looks very boring and sounds really what is civil service systems, but it's all about our rules, which ensure equity, which ensure productivity, which ensure transparency. So our rules are all about trying to promote this so that all civil servants are subject to the same rules and regulations. Then the other aspects of the civil service systems are how do you progress from the lower levels to the higher levels? How do we ensure? Because if people don't see a career path, then they're going to have issues of where do we go from here. So they must have a clear career path. It's about systems of how we make management decisions, what kind of protocols we have. These are things that make the structures in the system. So without these rules and regulations, without these management protocols and decision-making protocols, then there is no transparency. So if I know, okay, I want to get transferred from Dzongkhag A to Dzongkhag B, what are the guidelines for that? When I am eligible, what are the criteria that I can use to ensure that, okay, I have predictability in the transfers? So these are all things that affect people at the individual level. So they're very critical for us in terms of building it, making it people aware of that these things exist, and and actually implementing it uniformly.
I have not been into such a system ever, so I have very little knowledge about these things. But this is such a wonderful intervention that for an outsider like me, we often used to hear in the past of how psychophancy and culture of ingratiation works. And is your loyalty much more important than your productivity or honesty that brings you your promotions or perks. So you have this system of treating and assessing staff, employees fairly. Is it being implemented also effectively now?
Yes. So I'd like to maybe...
The whole idea of chamcha culture, no? Does this exist at the moment, or is now a thing of past?
Yes. So maybe if I explain the performance management system, then you would get a better idea.
Yes.
So prior to 2000, we introduced this new performance management system called the Managing for Excellence, or MAX, since 2016, fiscal year 16-17. So prior to that, the performance management was very weak. The system was very weak. Most civil servants would get rated as outstanding. So whether you performed or you didn't perform, you would get outstanding. So we realized that if we were to have a good performance management system, we have to have something which is quite drastic and breaks this culture. So starting 2016-17, we introduced this new system of Managing for Excellence, and the 3 key objectives. Alignment means you should align, the individual has to align his work plan to his division and his department. In the past, there was no alignment. You could write whatever you wanted in your performance evaluation because the system was so didn't really function well. Then the second is accountability. So you say what is it you're going to achieve in that year, and your supervisor has to vet it, so that he should know that, okay, this is something you have to do and you can do. And the third is differentiation. So that was the most controversial part of our new Managing for Excellence system, which is at the end of the fiscal year when it was time for people's evaluation. So your supervisor gave you his evaluation, but that was not the final evaluation. It had to go to a next level of vetting, where we had what we call the moderation committee. So based on how well your agency performed, you were given a bell curve, and you were forced to distribute your staff in 4 categories, and you were given a specific quota for each category. So if your agency performed very well, then you would get a certain number in outstanding, you get a certain number in very good, and a certain number in good, and you might be even forced to put people in need improvement. So that was an effort to break this culture of everyone being in outstanding. So as a result of this, then we are saying that because we forced this today, that's what I was just saying ahead. If today I want to know who are all the potential P5, people in P5, I can take down the list of all the ones who are in outstanding and in very good as people, and if they have got that consistently over 3 years, they have great potential. That's one effort we made. Then the other thing is we also have what we call the leadership feedback system. So if you find that a particular staff is really trying to, suck up to a certain particular boss, but doesn't take care of his staff below, the leadership feedback system is your time to have your say. So that is actually utilized to assess people in management positions. So you have, it's about 270 degrees, where you have assessment by your supervisor, your peer, and your subordinate. So these are systems that we try to put in place to ensure that you achieve what is it you have to do, but then at the same time you take care of your staff. That you do it in a mindful and a good way of building team instead of destroying teams. So these are the ways that we hope that we can create transparency and therefore greater accountability, and therefore less and less opportunities for doing the other kinds of business.
I mean, in a closely knit society that is ours, I think it's a very tough job, isn't it, to give a very strict, fair verdict on your peer or your boss or your staff. Anyway, on that note, I want to ask you, what helps you to stay sharp and on top of things to deal with such a huge organization with so many different you earlier described civil services, an organization with many heads, many hands, many feet. So what keeps you able and sharp to manage it? And also, what would be your tips, your advice for future employees in the civil service? I remember you described yourself to me once as a very disciplined person. Maybe I'll ask you to elaborate on that.
I'm not sure so disciplined, but I try to balance things. I believe that you have to have a healthy mind in a healthy body. So I try to eat reasonably well. I try to keep myself fit because you need to do your work productively and efficiently. You need help. And then in terms of taking care of my mind, I try to, I've started practicing meditation. So I feel that it has, I can see a few developments in me in terms of...
What kind of meditation do you do?
So it's
if
just...
you don't mind me asking you that.
It's basically, I try and focus my thing on my breath so that I have this focused attention, and then I try to say a few prayers. So very simple. I don't have any elaborate practices.
Is that something that the employees of the Royal Civil Service should take up?
No,
regular meditation.
Doctor, actually we promote a healthy lifestyle across the civil service. So on that we try and do a lot of programs. Like we have weekly basketball matches with where all civil servants are invited, ladies. Then we have the marathon,
Yes.
and now we want. So it's basically just to keep all of us fit,
Yes.
healthy, and if you exercise, then you have all the happy hormones flowing.
Yes.
So that is there. And then in terms of meditation, in RCC, every day at 1 o'clock, whoever is interested comes together and we do a 10-minute meditation.
Yes.
It's just basically for us to get into the practice,
Yes.
because at home maybe we get distracted by so many things.
Yes.
So
Yes.
very simple things I do.
Yes, thank you. And now with that, I'll invite questions from the audience.
The conversation. So my name is Cheryl, and I've just started with Mountain Hazelnuts. I'm fairly new to Bhutan. I've just moved here for the next 2 years. And I've worked internationally over the last sort of 10 plus years. But I actually started off my career in the civil service in Singapore. So a lot of this conversation has been extremely interesting to hear how things are here in Bhutan. So I guess my question is, Madam, have you found that there have been any unique challenges being a woman in the civil service, and how have you dealt with it?
Last, I really don't remember having any unique challenges as a woman. I think it's perhaps the way I look at it. I see myself as an officer of the government. And, all challenges that come in whatever form, I feel it's gender is irrelevant.
Yes.
I don't see any specific problems as being a woman. It's perhaps also because my organization is a good place to work.
What about maternity before the 6-month maternity leave was introduced? Was that a challenge? Because you were a mother before the program.
Yes. So I have 2 children, and I was able to balance my children and my careers because thanks to my husband, who really took on a lot of the responsibilities, and also my extended family. So in that sense, because I lived in a house that my mother-in-law lived downstairs and I lived upstairs. So there was this support system.
Thank you so much for giving such a great talk about our CSC and all the programs you are going to implement. I'm really hopeful now, and which was not always the case in the past. But I have a question which is very close to Dr. Karma, in fact. I'm very worried about the real assessment that you put in place, all the techniques and programs of the civil servants, when we are in such a small society. And I can see also in other organizations, if anybody wants to assess truly the person working with him or with her, and not doing what the society is expecting him or her to do, getting into trouble, saying you are not a good boss, you are not careful. So going away from the cha-cha culture, which was the norm when I was young, is very difficult. And the other question is really, can we be truly accountable in the civil society, in the civil service, because we are such a small society? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Tough question. In terms of giving the honest feedback, fortunately today, because of IT systems, you can be anonymous. So the LFS, the Leadership Feedback System, you give your feedback and nobody knows who's given that feedback. It's all compiled and so nobody knows the individual feedback. So in that sense, we had a lot of people asking us, I have given feedback, would they know it's me? So we've assured all people giving feedback that nobody will know that it's you. Because of the system, it's all going to be pooled together, and you will not know. Of course, if you have used the same words in your informal conversations, they perhaps can trace it back to you. But otherwise, if you've given very broad statements, I think it's not going to. They cannot. It's anonymous. The point I'm trying to make. About being truly accountable, if you look at the government performance management system, and if we are able to, because the government performance management system is the agency level performance, which is then from where the departments, divisions and individuals, they derive their targets and they derive the work that they have to do for that year. So if we can tighten that, make it much more robust than it is today, and we can make our national technical teams which evaluate these, and these teams work very transparently, I would think that there is a possibility that we can put higher levels of accountability on agencies and therefore by that on individuals. So systems are there, we have to be clever in the way we use it. So I would say the platforms are there, we just need to now leverage those platforms.
Can I add something to that? When you do these assessments within the civil service, but are you open to take also assessments or reports, reviews from the beneficiaries, especially in terms of public services?
Yes.
I think we should, as public, have the right to give feedback on a certain staff.
Yes. To start with, we kept the feedback to 70, but on service delivery, definitely there's room, and in fact, our service delivery programs that we want to implement, we're going to do customer satisfaction surveys. So hopefully then we have both the view of the provider as well as the receiver.
Yes.
I'm Kamadinsin from Digital High Secondary School, and it's a privilege for me to be a part of this program, Bhutan Dialogues, and getting an opportunity to ask a question. So my question is, our government's aim is to provide wholesome and quality education to the young youth. However, many teachers are recruiting through contract basis without proper training and all. So does it hamper the education standards, and what would be the long-term goal, long-term plan?
Yes. So as I said earlier, because of policy change, the number of requirement for teachers has really shot up. The contact hours was reduced from, I think, 30 to 20 hours. So now the requirement for teachers are much more higher. So we expect that the quality of education also will be better. Unfortunately, we cannot avoid teachers taking leave or going on EOL or resigning from the service. So as an interim measure, we have to put in contract teachers so that there is at least somebody to provide some minimum services. It's not the ideal, and that's not also what we want. But the supply in terms of trained and qualified teachers, it's taking time to catch up. So year on year, we are putting in over 300 teachers into the system, and that is not sufficient. And there is only that limited supply in terms of the supply coming out from the colleges, and we have to subject them to to exams, because for those who we want as regular teachers, they have to pass our exams. It's a requirement of the law, and the intent is that we get quality people for all times. So as an alternative to that, to plug the immediate requirements, we have no alternative but to put in contract teachers. But hopefully, as the system evens out, we would have less and less of that situation in the years to come.
I think there's a follow-up question I wanted to ask to this. I didn't really get the opportunity earlier. You mentioned how civil service attracts the brightest and the best. But then we have also in the past years witnessed how the very best, sharp, adventurous ones are also moving out in droves, following the Australian dream. And the contract teacher issue is one problem you face. What other repercussions is this Australian dream having on the civil service?
Yes. So if you look at the attrition rates in the government, it's about 3%. So 3% is an acceptable number as an attrition rate. And if you look at people going on extraordinary leave in a year, at any point of time, perhaps about 600 or so civil servants are on extraordinary leave. So those numbers are not really large. It might seem like as if everybody wants to go to Australia and is going to Australia, but that's actually, if you look at the numbers, that's not the case. So we have an acceptable number of attrition and an acceptable number of people on EOL.
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor. Nothing important, but something relevant came to my mind when I think about the civil service. When I joined WFP in 2009 March, after a few months, I had to do something online, like the basic security in the field. This is just one example. Not that I'm immediately going into the war zone, but as I went on doing this exercise, I realized that it could have been useful if I had done this long time back. It's basically about your own safety, how to prepare yourself when you travel or something. So this is one example. Beyond that, we also have online courses on sexual exploitation in abuse, on ethics, and so many things. So I thought today is the best opportunity for me to share such ideas between the Royal Civil Service Commission and the United Nations systems here. So at some point, maybe if you can have more dialogues, I think this will contribute to the improvement of the civil service system in the country. Thank you.
Last, Doctor, if I may just quickly
Yes.
I think when I was in the UN, I also undertook those courses, and it's definitely very useful. And our approach towards capacity building and training in the civil service is 70% of learning should be on the job, 20% should be like blended learning that you were talking about, and then 10% should be actually classroom training. So this is a very cost-effective way of making people learn, but without them having to take too much time off from work. But the specific courses that you mentioned, I mean, we would be very happy to see the possibilities of it being done in the civil service. Thank you.
I think with that, we'll come to the last question, which we always ask our guest. Is we offer 2 titles as a token of appreciation, and you have chosen these 2 titles. Can you tell us why? And
Yes.
if you can talk about any books that you found inspirational and want other people to read.
Yes. On Sapiens, I'm currently reading the same author's second book, which is Thinking of the 21st Century Thinking. So I thought I should have the trilogy. So one of it is Sapiens. And as a student of history, I'm very interested in this book.
And
Then the second one is Chris Blackie, and we use a lot of Chris Blackie in our trainings, but I never got to read her book. So her book is all about how to use the thought model to get to be effective. So it's about change your thinking. So this is very relevant in the civil service because we want people to be able to look at problems differently and how we can solve the problems ahead of us by changing the way we are thinking about it. So the 2 books in brief.
That's okay. So books that you will get. We don't have the books yet, but we've got the dummies. So
Thank you, Doctor.
we guarantee that you'll get these books. But you've already read this title, you said. So
No,
you want
I'm reading his second book.
Oh, you're reading.
Yes, so I thought it's very good
I'm
to.
halfway through this book, so
Yes.
I highly recommend it. That brings us to the conclusion of this session. Let's give a round of applause to our guest. And I normally end the session with a Bhutanese proverb or a quote or a verse. Today I thought this old saying would be most appropriate for you in order to do your performance assessment. Zangbo zengte emba sarche. Honor the good, penalize the bad. So with that, thank you very much.